Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Dr. Miller, and this is the Dr. Miller Hour. And we're here to bring you another very interesting show in the field of sex and relationships. Just a little background on myself. I'm a professor at 4 different universities, and I teach in 5 different fields. And psychology, law, business, criminology, and economics. And I'm here today with a very interesting guest, Professor and Dr. Renee Hollander, who is a very well-known psychologist, clinical psychologist here in California, who's written a number of books, and he's going to talk to you about his book. And today, Renee is going to help you with your sex problems, any kind of problems that you have. You're certainly welcome to call us in. You'll have 2 doctors who will be able to answer your questions. And we're talking to you from another beautiful wonderful weather day in Los Angeles, California, where the air is 72 and sunny, and I have my very interesting guest, Dr. Hollander. How are you, Renee?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure, really, having you here.
And I agree, it's a wonderful day in California.
It is a wonderful day.
Yes, it is.
In fact, Dr. Hollander was just telling me he came here on his motorcycle, and you can't do that in too many other places consistently.
Yeah, I guess not. I got into the motorcycle thing because, as you know, Los Angeles is a very busy city with many cars, and parking is becoming a real problem.
Right.
So I decided to beat the whole thing by riding on the motorcycle.
I think you're absolutely right.
But you got to be careful.
You got to be very careful because it isn't you. You know, I'm also a lawyer.
That's right.
And I've handled a number of cases involving motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my cases, I don't want to scare you, was a young man who was sitting in a line of traffic, minding his own business, when somebody who was not too alert came out of a side street, didn't see him, just drove right into him and took off his leg.
Oh.
So he couldn't have done anything about it. But I don't want to start our program off with too much negative stuff. Anyway, Renee, I noticed that you brought a book with you, The Boomer's Guide to Sex That Still Sizzles.
Yes.
Tell us about that book. Is that your new book?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how I got to this, actually. A friend of mine, Michael Levin, one of the co-authors of the book, started with this book, and he kind of got stuck with it. He's a writer, and he wrote a number of other books as well. And the publisher wanted him to get somebody on board that was a psychologist and knew something about this, and I teach neurophysiology and human sexuality and courses like that. And so he asked me to come on board to help him out write the book. And so that's what I did. This is in 2002. I started this project.
Is that your first book?
No, I wrote another book. It's just it's very different than this.
Yeah.
It's called Everyone's Guide to Saving Gas. And I wrote it during the first energy crisis.
Well, we should tell the audience that you have a background as a racing car kind of a guy.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, when I was a little boy, I decided when I grew up I was going to be a race car driver. And lo and behold, I did become one. I drove race cars in most parts of the country here. I designed and built my own cars. I designed a Can-Am car, designed a Formula 5000 car, and for years, that's what I did.
It's interesting to me, especially because 2 shows ago, our guest was Terry O'Connell, who is a NASCAR champion, and as you say, there's a number of divisions in NASCAR, and she was very interesting because at one time she was a guy, and Terry decided that she was born a woman, born a man, but really felt like a woman, so she had a sex change in which she completely altered her sex, and we had some very, very interesting calls that Terry fielded on that, and by the way, if you still want to call, I'm sure we can answer any questions that you have in that.
Yeah. Well, I just want to let you know that being a race car driver does not automatically preclude you to become, as a man, to become a woman. So, because I have no intention of doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. Okay. And I understand that you're still doing some work on cars because you're working on a little sports car, a little Fiat.
Yes, I'm restoring an old car. That's a 1969 Fiat.
850.
850.
Yeah, I happen to be a Fiat driver. I drive Fiat convertibles also, and I've driven them for years.
Right.
So for me, Fiat always stood for Fix It Again, Tony. And
yeah, but I think that's actually a good thing. And I'll tell you why. I think that kind of involves you with the car.
Right.
And so you have a connection with it you wouldn't have if you just used it as transportation and had no kind of emotional contact with it.
You know, it's true. I still have the Fiat, and I've gotten rid of the other cars.
That's right.
And I do like that little guy.
That's
Or
right.
little gal, whatever it is.
They talk to you.
They talk to you. They're
Especially
very
when they
kids.
break down.
Yeah, especially when they break down. Well, I don't drive very far, so it's okay. But anyway, so you got into this book. You were
Yeah.
called by the publisher to help.
Right, no, by Michael Levin, who started the whole project off, and so the whole thing was with, and in my practice also, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work people with their marital problems, things like that, and there has been a kind of a thing about sexual passion that's been, let's say, lacking in many cases because of stress, because of complications and what have you in people's lives. And as you can see on television, you see many ads for Viagra and Cialis and all these stimulants that help them up again. And we decided that maybe we can tell people a little bit about themselves, about sexual techniques, sexual ideas. And we wanted to put a book together that was very frank, that we can, that you know, we didn't hide what was going on, and aimed it at the boomers. And the boomers are the people, of course, that are now in their middle 50s to 60s and stuff, and still interested in being alive rather than being put out to pasture.
Right.
What's interesting, however, about the book is that I've noticed that many young people are buying it. And what I've noticed in the last 5 years or so, there's been a lot of complaints about lack of desire. And so this book might help people kind of get interested again and be playful about sex.
Well, that's right. What do you think the lack of desire is, if it is that, is coming from?
Yeah. I think it took a long time to get here, and this is kind of this is my opinion, but I think it holds.
Certainly entitled. You're on the show.
Yeah. in the 60s, the 1960s, for the first time in history, reliable birth control became available.
Okay.
So what occurred then, it put women for the first time on a level playing field in terms of being able to participate in sex in an enjoyable, fearless kind of manner. What that set up was, I think, for the males who at that point kind of didn't have to worry about women's satisfaction because of what I just said, sex became a performance kind of dynamic, almost became a sport. People, men were becoming compared, women were compared. And if you remember, the 60s was also at least in the United States and Western Europe, the time of free love and lots of sexual experimentation. Right. This came about, and I think what happens now, and what happened from that point to now, is that there's so much expectation about what sex is supposed to deliver that rather than fail at it, why not just avoid it? That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that our economic world today is very stressful.
Yeah.
Whereas in the 60s, at least in this country, if you spend a quarter of your income on housing, that was a reasonable amount.
Right.
Today, as high as 80% now.
Is it really? I'm not familiar with that.
Take a look at people who work on minimum wage. How do they afford housing? So when you kind of factor those things in, and the job of just staying alive is such a full-time job, sex takes time. Sex takes planning. Sex should be fun, and that kind of takes away from it. Then add to the fact that we have now 2 income families most of the time. Sex kind of took a back burner, which I think is sad.
Both the husband and the wife are out there working, and they have these higher standards than, let's say, the families that came after the Depression, where it was just enough to have an apartment.
Right.
Today you have 2 cars. You see the home and garden shows where everybody's getting a new kitchen and a new patio. Who ever heard of that when in the 30s, 40s, and 50s?
That's right.
That didn't exist. People were just glad to have a little roof over their head. And so there's expectations financially. And are you saying that may have a dampening effect on libido?